Hi, my name is Georgia Hughes and today I'm going to be discussing state chair in Greece. I do know that this is a little bit late. It was a mix-up on my end of what weeks I was supposed to be presenting on and what I initially agreed upon, so I do apologise if there's any issue with that. But nevertheless, I'm here to talk about what were the reactions of the European Economic Community and the Council of Europe to the human rights abuses in Greece. So I kind of want to approach this first of explaining the roles of the two different bodies, and then to go into explaining how they reacted to what was going on in Greece and how it changed a lot of their policies. So to begin with, the European Economic Community was created in 1957, kind of born out of a number of treaties signed initially by Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany, as it was at the time, and later saw more members join throughout its history. This body was created for economic integration throughout Europe. They wanted to create a common market and commonality essentially across a lot of the countries that joined initially through trade policies and tariffs, or eliminating them rather, and then would later go on to further legislation beyond economic. They hoped that by doing so, this was going to help preserve relations amongst countries, especially the post-World War II peace. So they have the Commission, which was a lot of their policies, the Council of Ministers, which is legislative, and European Parliament, which was its constitutive body. So there was a few things that made up, as it went on over time, the EEC. So then there's also the Council of Europe, so the COE. They were more about protecting and unifying the legal, cultural and social issues, which the EEC would later go on to do as well. But from the get-go, this is what the COE was about. And for protecting democracy and especially human rights was quite a big factor for the COE. So they were created in 1949. Their founding countries, I guess, included Belgium, Denmark, France, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the UK. And then over time, more and more countries joined. In a whole, they were also very similar to the EEC in that they wanted to create international agreements, treaties, conventions that were shared. So again, that idea of common and commonality, cohesiveness, instead of having lots of little individual ones. So they had the European Commission of Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights that worked within the COE, which is just important to point out. The Solario reading sort of described their efforts up until the Greek questions as quite modest and being very rhetorical, but the Greek question would go on to. So in the early days of what was happening in Greece, the COE saw what was going on as a humanitarian crisis, and they were very worried about making any drastic measures from the beginning. So they chose not to do anything like expulsion. There were worries about their members, and I think the surveillance of them played into that quite a bit as well. And so as a whole, their members opted against expulsion of Greece, instead ordering a directive. This directive was Directive 256, which was quite instrumental into the responses of the EEC and the COE to Greece's human rights violations. So essentially, they were urging the Greek junta to go back to democracy and to respect the terms of the European Convention of Human Rights that they were, as members of the COE and the EEC, they were agreeing to follow, which they weren't. This was a condition of their membership and they weren't following it, so the Directive 256 was asking that they do so. There was communication back and forth with Greece in which they enacted Article 15 of the Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights rather, and essentially explained that yes, we know we're violating human rights, here's why we're doing it, but we're not going to change anything, we can't change anything, here's why. So this then had pull on the EEC, seeing that the COE's Directive 256 wasn't really doing anything, and they enacted, they had articles within the Joint Paramilitary Commission of the European Council of Greece and the European Parliamentary Committee on the Association with Greece. Lots of words there. And essentially, though, they used those two groups that Greece was a part of and also had communication urging the COE to stop the European Investment Bank's financial support of Greece. So they used what bodies they could to try and put pressure. And then they also... So the EEC and the EP, the European Parliament, and their commission, they had quite a lot of internal battles regarding exactly what they were going to do. The same thing. They were worried about suspensions and sanctions against Greece, and there was caution from both the EEC and the COE. They didn't really know what to do, but all their underlying bodies below them, they were in agreement that yes, Greece had broken the human rights, but how are we going to go about this? So there was a lot of, red tape that was stopping them actually doing anything. The COE's Council of Ministers agreed on symbolically freezing and restricting their association with Greece. So that was a bit more of a political move. But again, there was no real outcomes of this. It didn't really do anything except just being quite a harsh stance. And it didn't stand to actually change anything. So following some changes of leadership within the the EEC in 1967, their commission came out a lot harsher and a lot publicly, displaying exactly what they were doing with the junta and why they were doing it, and that they were completely against what was going on, essentially internationally condemning what was happening. So later that same year, there was pushes a legal complaint filed by Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands before the European Commissions of Human Rights against Greece. And this led to many members formally asking for their expulsion from the COE, which, again, was just not as simple as as it sounds. So years went on, and things in Greece sort of boiled down and happened the way they did, but there was a big influence from what happened in Greece on the EEC and the COE actually implementing... So in 1970, so later the EEC would go on to launch the European Political Cooperative to coordinate foreign policies. So this was as a result of what was happening in Greece, and the fact that because of a lot of technicalities and interpretations of the rules and laws, there was no nothing they could really do to Greece aside from symbolics and political things that weren't really having an effect. They made it their mission to include in all of their bodies any pieces of legislation or things like that human rights violations would be at the top of that, and that there would be clear courses of actions that they could take as a result of any violations. So the Davinon report was one of these, which reflected Greece's human rights violations in its wording to set up protection of human rights. So the COE did the same thing. They pushed for basically human rights to be included at the top of everything that they did, and that compliance was, and that compliance couldn't just be ignored, like it in a way had to be with Greece. And this included things like refusing aid to third world countries who violated human rights violations, and just made it a forefront of their thing. So despite having these councils and conventions for human rights, there wasn't really anything they could do. So moving forward, Greece and the junta forced them to do so. So despite not really having a lot that they could do at the time, the issues in Greece really pushed the EEC and the COE to change their legislation, to work together in ways they hadn't previously, and change their legislation to have real effects to protect human rights in the future. So it had quite a big effect on these bodies moving forward at a time when human rights violations were really coming to the forefront. So thank you very much for listening. It's a little bit all over the place. I've really struggled with online learning and teaching myself content, but I think I got the gist of what was going on, and I hope that I demonstrated that today. So thank you very much for watching.